Hello everyone! With Hearthstone's Journey to Un'Goro card reveal season hot underway, in this video I want to take a little bit of a look at Discardlock. We have already seen both Warlock legendary cards, both the quest and the legendary minion, and both of them are designed to support a discard based Warlock archetype. So let's take a little bit of a look on what kind of discard synergy cards the Warlock is going to be running in the Year of the Mammoth. What do we know so far? What are the old cards that we have at our disposal? What are the new options that we have been given? And what does that imply for the Warlock? First of all, we have the Succubus. And, well, it's a basic set card. It's a 2-mana 4/3 that discards a card when it's played. And Succubus generally does not see a lot of play. It's not very powerful. That 3 health means that it trades quite inefficiently against other 2-drops, for example, and that really limits its power, so it is not seeing a lot of play right now, and I don't think it will see a lot of play in the future either. Another basic set card that we have available is Soulfire. And Soulfire is a lot more powerful than Succubus. It's a 1-mana spell to deal 4 damage and discard a random card. And it has just incredible power and flexibility. You can use that to deliver burst damage to face, so you can end games with it. And it can also act as a pinch removal. Say you're facing this warrior and they play this Frothing Berserker and you don't have the minions to remove it. If need be, you can Soulfire that one down and continue with the game. Then we have the Doomguard, the good old classic set staple of discard decks, a 5-mana 5/7 charge minion that unfortunately as a battle cry discards 2 cards from your hand, so you pay a hefty price for it, but you do get a lot of power in return. In fact, Doomguard is such a powerful card that it was a staple in Zoo already before Discard Zoo was a thing. So people were running this card even though the discard effect was only a detriment and there was no actual advantage to discarding cards. That's exactly how powerful it is. Looking at the history of Doomguard also gives us some valuable lessons that we can think about when we think about building future Discardlock decks. Once upon a time in the history of Zoo, there were 2 competing lists, sort of. One was based on the Doomguard, and the other list was based on the ability to create tokens and play Sea Giant, a 8/8 minion, a very powerful minion that becomes cheaper the more minions there are on the board. And typically the list that preferred to play Sea Giant actually did not play Doomguard. Most of them played Leroy Jenkins instead. Why? Because you wanted to get that Doomguard out. We also want to get the Sea Giant out. And sometimes things just went so that you would have to play the Doomguard before you filled the conditions to play the Sea Giant. And then discarding that Sea Giant was such an immense value loss, even though you obviously gained tempo with the Doomguard. But the loss of value was something that you would find it hard to recover from later in the game. So these kinds of deck ran Leroy Jenkins to give them a charge burst finish, and cut the Doomguard because they wanted to preserve the Sea Giants. Having important cards that you really want to hold on to and having discard effects do not go very well together. And that's something we need to consider when we look at the future of Discardlock in a little while. From Whispers of the Old Gods expansion we have the Darkshire Librarian. Darkshire Librarian sees some play in current discard decks, but it's also one of the first cards that generally is going to be cut, if there are cuts to be made. It's a 2-mana 3/2 that discards a random card as a battle cry, but allows you to draw a card as a death rattle. However, that 3/2 body on 2 mana, that's not very impressive. Many of the 1-drops can trade into it. It's just not very good. It's quite thoroughly average. And average usually means that it doesn't make it into the deck. So it's mostly in the decks for that discard mechanic ability to abuse the discard mechanic with some other cards. If that kind of ability didn't exist, there would be no reason to play Darkshire Librarian, unlike the Doomguard, for example. So you're not really getting a ton of value from adding Darkshire Librarian into your deck. I think it's a card that might see some play, but it's also a card that is one of the first ones to go if better options are available. And then, once Blizzard decided to make discard a real thing, there was the One Night in Karazhan and the Malchezaar's Imp. Malchezaar's Imp is perhaps the most important card in a Discardlock deck. Because Malchezaar's Imp is a 1-mana 1/3 minion that allows you to draw a card whenever you discard a card. So you play your Malchezaar's Imp, you play your Doomguard, you discard 2 cards, you draw another 2. Or the Dream combo at 7 mana, you play double Imp into Doomguard, discard 2 cards and draw 4. And these kinds of discard decks that are currently played and that utilize Malchezaar's Imp, they generally do not go into Fatigue. Fatigue is not a game plan. Actually, Fatigue is probably not ever going to be a game plan for discard decks. They will want to end the game early. Or mid-game, sometime anyway, not going all the way to Fatigue. So drawing a lot of cards, discarding cards, as long as you regain resources to replace the ones that you discard, you're still doing fine. And Malchezaar's Imp is a key enabler of that. Without Malchezaar's Imp, Discardlock decks would generally risk running out of cards, but Malchezaar's Imp just keeps them refueled. A huge card for Discardlock. And also it's going to be a key piece in all Discardlock decks in the future as well. So you can mark Malchezaar's Imp as one of the auto-includes in Discardlock decks in the Year of the Mammoth as well. Then another discard synergy card that was released in One Night in Karazhan, the Silverware Golem. It's a 3-mana 3/3 that, if it's discarded, it is summoned. So this was another key piece to enable discard decks. You actually turn that discard, which is generally a bad thing, into a good thing by cheating out free 3/3 minions into play. And setting up to your hand so that you have the best probability to actually discard this card instead of something else is one of the key aspects into how to play Discardlock. Silver Golem's effect is just so good getting these free minions that I expect it to also see play in all Discardlock decks. Then if we look at discard a little bit more widely, also outside the box that it's currently used in, well, there is Deathwing. Deathwing, the legendary classic set minion, 10 mana 12/12, that as a battle cry destroys all other minions on the board and discards your entire hand. Currently there are no Discardlock decks that utilize Deathwing, but in theory there could be. Because also Deathwing works with both Malchezaar's Imp, so if you have a Malchezaar's Imp on the board when you play Deathwing, the Malchezaar's Imp is destroyed, but it will also draw you as many cards as you discard from hand when you play Deathwing. And also, if you have Silver Golem in hand and you play Deathwing, then the Silver Golem is summoned on the board. So the destruction effect happens first and then the Silver Golem is summoned. So you will have Deathwing and the Golem on the board at the same time. So it does have some synergy with these discard synergy cards. But one of the issue with Deathwing in discard decks is that you're going to be discarding cards from very early on. And you generally don't really like discarding that Deathwing. So most Discardlock decks right now rely on replaceable assets. You're running cards, but you don't particularly care which of the cards you have as long as you have cards. So you can cycle and you can discard and draw new cards to replace them. You don't care that you throw those cards away. That's okay. You have equally powerful cards in your deck that are going to take their place. And with Deathwing, that's not the case really. If you discard the Deathwing, then well, the Deathwing is gone and you don't have anything quite like it in your deck. So even though it has some synergy with many discard cards, it also has this significant anti-synergy that really hurts a discard deck that's trying to be based on Deathwing. Some new cards have also been revealed. And we start with this one, the Lakkari Felhound, a 4-mana 3/8 taunt that discards 2 random cards. So that's a pretty hefty price to pay, discarding 2 cards, the same cost as the Doom God. What you get is a 3/8 taunt, not quite as impactful as a Doom God 5/7 charge, cost 1 mana less of course as well. It does have a great stat line for its mana cost, but it's still kind of a borderline. Is it going to be really worth it? If you try to take it a little bit slower, then yeah, I guess the Lakkari Felhound could do it for you. But the current Discardlock decks are very aggressive, and fitting in that Lakkari Felhound might be a bit troublesome there. And then the legendaries. First we have the Warlock quest, Lakkari Sacrifice. So you discard 6 cards and you're rewarded with this spell, the Nether Portal. And the Nether Portal is a 5-mana spell that opens a permanent portal on your board. So it is, technically it's a minion, it takes a minion slot on the board, but it's untargetable and it cannot be destroyed by any means, including stuff like Twisting Nether. So it will be impossible to remove that portal from the middle of your board for the rest of the game. And at the end of each of your turns, the portal spawns 3/2 imps on both sides of it. So 2 3/2 imps will spawn at the end of every single one of your turns until the end of the game. So that's a fairly powerful effect. You get 6/4 stats every turn until the end of the game from a portal that cannot be destroyed. But problem is that this quest is all about value. You gain this huge value, fairly low tempo but huge value. And this really does not seem to play into the strengths of Discardlock right now. And there are some other anti-synergies with this kind of zoo-ish deck type. For example, because the portal occupies a minion space in the middle of your board, you will find it hard to do stuff like Direwolf Alpha chains. So typically Zoo has a bunch of small minions, they have a Direwolf Alpha, and then they can trade them away into a big minion one by one and get that damage bonus to each individual minion. But then when you have this block in the middle of your board, you're unable to set up that kind of a chain. You can only use half of your board for it, ever. So it's actually pretty hard to find a spot for the Lakkari Sacrifice. Let's take a look at the Warlock legendary minion, because this card is nuts. It's Clutchmother Zavas, a 2-mana 2/2 that whenever you discard it, you give it +2/+2 and return it back to your hand. But it would actually be a disservice to evaluate Zavas based on its stats. Okay, so you discard it 3 times and then you play a 2-mana 8/8. Awesome, isn't it? Okay, that's kind of nice. Sometimes Arcane Giants can do stuff like that for you. Mountain Giant can get close. It's nice, but not game changing. But what is really game changing about Zavas is that it conserves your resources. And if you're into the quest, it helps you complete the quest. So every time you discard Zavas, when you have other cards also in your hand, you save that card to be played later. And say you manage to discard Zavas 3 times, and you manage to save some other cards 3 times. That's actually means that you have basically drawn 3 cards just by holding Zavas in your hand. And the effect of holding Zavas in your hand is actually a lot more valuable than the effect of actually playing it. Okay, playing it can be nice, of course, but just holding it in your hand, letting it save your other cards, letting it advance your quest for free, that's the real value. Zavas also has great synergy with Malchezaar's Imp. So, you have only Zavas in hand, and one card that discards another card. You play that card, you have Imp on the board, you discard Zavas, you draw Zavas again, return Zavas to your hand, and you draw a card. If that's a discard card, you play that. You discard Zavas, you get it back into your hand, you draw a card. I mean, Zavas and Imp have such immense synergy. Overall though, Discard Zoo does seem extremely reliant on finding one of the 3 key cards. Zavas and the 2 copies of Malgazar's Imp. Those are the cards that enable the Discard Zoo to be discarding cards but still have cards in hand, so they don't run out of resources. And in games where you can find them, maybe even all of them, you're just going to be drawing cards so much. But if you can't find any of these cards, then you're very fast out of resources and it's getting a bit more difficult to play. With these card options, what kind of decks could we build? Obviously the quest is interesting, but the real strength, to me at the moment at least, looks to be in Discard Zoo. Gaining that Clutchmother Zavas into the deck is just such a huge asset. And when you look at what is Discard Zoo really losing in the rotation, okay, they are losing 2 cards. And both of those cards are pretty good. They're the Dark Peddler and the Imp Gang Boss. But still, they're a 2-drop and a 3-drop. And you get Zavas. So you need to find 3 more cards in order to be able to run this deck. So Discard Zoo looks like it's going to have a decent time. It's already ladder viable right now. Ever since the nerf to Spirit Claws and Small Time Buccaneer happened, Discard Zoo has been ladder viable. And it's losing 2 powerful cards, but if it gets anything in return, it's still in a good position. Other than Zoo, there's the matter of running the quest. And it's very hard to see where the Lakkari Sacrifice quest would actually fit in. I mean, could you build like a control warlock that runs just Deathwing? You discard all of the cards at once and then you get the portal? Maybe. Looks a bit difficult. And would you even like the portal then? If you discard 6 control warlock cards, is getting 6/4 stats every turn even worthwhile? Is it worth it to sacrifice 6 control cards? Depends on how long the game is going to be, but that's a huge sacrifice to make. And then when you look at the Discard Zoo, well, if you have the quest, you want to play the quest before you play any discard cards. And that means that you might even want to play it on 1. But as Zoo, you cannot really afford to play it on 1 because you cannot sacrifice so much tempo. You have to get a 1-drop on the field. So again, a little bit awkward. Also, if you keep the quest in the mulligan, but you still want to play a 1-drop, then you're effectively keeping a card that you know you're not going to be playing. And you're lowering your odds of finding the other cards that you would actually want to play. So there are quite some troubles fitting the quest in the control archetype. There are quite some problems fitting the quest into a Zoo type of archetype. And even overall, the value of the quest is limited by Jade Golems. If you complete the quest, you get 6/4 stats every turn. If you're facing a Jade deck and you're taking this to a long game, and they play 10/10 stats every turn, your 6/4 stats are just not that impressive anymore. So whether those stats can take you to a long game is also a question. Currently the best fit for the Lakkari Sacrifice quest seems to be some kind of mid-range Warlock deck. So you would not play 2 valuable cards so that you can afford to do the Discardlock thing. You discard cards, you draw other cards that replace them, and you don't really care that you discard these cards because you have equally good replacements. And then you would probably want to run stuff like Lakkari Felhound if you want to run the quest, because then you're playing on a little bit of a slower game plan and the Lakkari Felhound will help you survive to get there. And you also obviously need to really heavily abuse the Malgazar's Imp and Clutchmother Zavas in order to get to the point where you can get the quest done. But it just seems to me at the moment that this kind of mid-range quest-based Discardlock is inferior to the more aggressive Discard Zoo, which also gains a pretty good card in Zavas. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the show, please click the like button and subscribe to my channel for more.